My name is Tom, and I'm in great need of 100,000 Al-Anon meetings. Thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here and see some old friends and hopefully make some new ones. I was talking with a couple of folks, and I know we don't get involved in outside controversial issues because there are so many of them. But I like Reno better than Vegas. I just want, I know. And it's just one of those things, and it's always been true, so I'm glad to be here. Part of it is when I was a kid, grew up in San Jose, but we'd go to Lake Tahoe and regularly come over as kids, to see Carson City and, watch Bonanza, and I mean, all those things, and Reno was part of that. And those are good memories. So we have a long history, you and I. What other outside controversial issues do I not want to talk about? This is the 100th anniversary of Prohibition becoming the law of the land. And that's kind of a fascinating subject, and books are written on it, and I've got a great big long talk on it. Ken Burns, the documentarian, has put together a series that appeared on PBS called Prohibition, and it is endlessly fascinating. How it happened and then how it unraveled. It is quite extraordinary, Prohibition. And a lot of the leaders of the Christian Women's Temperance Union were battered wives and battered daughters. This was, we're going to save the country. Also in 1920, and this is even more controversial, women got the vote. Now, I have no opinion on women voting. I don't want to get involved. But one of the reasons Prohibition and women voting, because it's impossible to amend the Constitution, they went through at the same time because they figured if women vote, they'll vote for Prohibition. And when Prohibition unraveled, 1932, 1933, there were women who were in the forefront of that campaign too. So it's just extraordinary to watch how things happen. So there. I've been coming to Al-Anon for a long time, and some people do not get my sense of humor, so if I offend you, please talk to your sponsor. I have the habit of thinking that I'm hilarious, but I offend people without necessarily, so what does that have to do with anything? I was asked to speak on Tuesday of this week to the faculty and staff of St. Ignatius College Prep in San Francisco, which is the Jesuit high school for girls and boys. And I'm a broken down old high school teacher, a broken down old high school English history teacher. So I got the invitation to come. And what they do at that school a couple times a year, and I don't know whether it's 3 times or 4 times, they have an outside speaker come in and talk about a topic. And they're trying to get the faculty and staff to be more reflective and kind of grow spiritually and grow in terms of service and a larger vision other than just correcting papers and yelling at children all day long. So they asked me to come and talk about recovery. And I'm a member of the Jesuit community, and there's some Jesuit stuff that's peripheral but parallel. So I went and I was getting talks together, and you do this and you put some material together and some material together, and then I do a little bit of research, and I'm going to hand out this. I ended out, because a high school teacher hands out papers, 2 pages on both sides. One of which was just the 12 steps. because we talk about them, but that doesn't mean people have read them, or reflected on them. And the other was some suggested reading and a few other things. And so I'm getting this all, I'm ready to talk about alcoholism and drug addiction, and I'm ready to talk about a few other things in recovery world. And I was mentioning this to a friend of mine that I'm putting this talk together, and my friend said, "You're going to talk about Al-Anon?" And I want you to know, it never occurred to me to talk about Al-Anon to a room full of high school teachers. Because high school kids act just like alcoholics. And you react and you get caught up in all the drama. And one of the reasons I left teaching high school kids in 1981, I was burned out and exhausted. I knew nothing about self-care. And it was like suddenly there was, what these high school people need to hear is Al-Anon. And then mention a few other things, but oh my goodness. So I told some of my own stories and a few other things, and some of them laughed and some of them did not. And I shared some insights. I mentioned to them that I have taught high school kids drunk and sober, and drunk was easier. Not a lot laughed at that one. But a number of us from chaotic families go into the helping professions. And I'm not going to do this tonight, but I suspect there's a couple of teachers here. I suspect there's a couple of nurses here. I suspect there's a couple of social workers here. Clergy, police officers, members of the United States Marine Corps. I mean, that's where we go, the few, the proud, and the brave. And we will go the extra mile. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, ran all the Al-Anon members. And then we just don't know why we are covered with shots and battered and beaten so badly, and oh my goodness. And so I mentioned to them, and I mentioned to me, and I mentioned to you that so much of the Al-Anon recovery program is learning how to do life smarter. And instead of getting involved in stuff that is none of our business, learning how to do this smarter. Some of us get into recovery and we change professions, change careers, because what we could do in our craziness, we cannot do in our recovery. There's also some tension between doctors and nurses. You probably never noticed that. And I'm pro-nurse, just 100% of the way, because they know more. And they're with people more, pro-nurse. And we can take care of others, we cannot take care of ourselves. So one of the signs of someone who needs 100,000 Al-Anon meetings is that you're exhausted and you're enraged and you don't know what to do next, but you better show up on time. I mentioned at a meeting in the other program, one of the other programs, that I was sober for a few years before I joined Al-Anon, and it has been life-saving for me because I've got a lot of very destructive thinking, and I'm going to share a little bit of that with you tonight. But I found Al-Anon helped me change course. My mentor in Al-Anon was a woman named Blanche. She died in 2000, 20 years ago. I mean, that's just, as an older person, it's amazing what seems like yesterday, and it's been 20 years. Blanche said, in Al-Anon, we learn how to keep our sails out of other people's wind. And boy, I like visual images like that. And there's a lot of wind blowing. And all kinds of people want me to get wrapped up in their stuff. You know, if you send $10 to a cause, suddenly you get a billion emails a day asking for $10 for the cause. And most of it I just delete because it's not my issue, not my issue. I wish you well, but I don't have any more $10 to send you. You know, so boom, practical stuff. I went to the International Al-Anon convention in Baltimore a couple years ago. The next one's in Albuquerque, I think in 3 years, which is just south of here. You can all make it. And I went to the one in Vancouver, and we have Al-Anon craziness. One of the things that Al-Anons are known for, we have a little tendency towards perfectionism and control. So it's Saturday in Vancouver, and I walked up to the guy in charge, our trusted servant, and I said, how many people are here? He wouldn't tell me. I said, how many, talk slower, how many people have registered and shown up for this convention? He wouldn't tell me. And I asked the third time, and he wouldn't tell me. And I said, why aren't you telling me this? And he said, because we don't have the exact figures in yet. And we'll send out an email in a couple of weeks once we've counted everybody a couple of times. And I almost said to him, I would have been happy with around 4,000. You know? So, Baltimore, different group running things, and I went up to the person in charge, and I said, how many people are here? And the person said, between 4,000 and 5,000. Perfect number, thank you, that's all I wanted to know. What's wrong with you people? Which means you're not overwhelmed by big numbers. In the program that's going to go on in Detroit, there'll be 70,000 people, which means you'll spend a lot of time in line in the bathroom. I mean, and then everyone's in the way. Al-Anon is a much easier convention to attend, so I just want to mention that to you. And we come from all over, and in the in the Baltimore convention, they had lots of groups. They had small groups of people there, and one of the speakers for the public sessions was married to an alcoholic, and most of the others were adult children of alcoholics in 3 or 4 languages. So we had quick translations. It's an international convention. And I think they may have had one person who had a child or grandchildren who's out there. I think those numbers will change for Albuquerque, and more parents and grandparents will be sharing because they're the new face of Al-Anon. You know, the new people coming in. They thought they were perfect and everything was good until their child or grandchild went to treatment the second time. And suddenly, full of fear and rage, you come to Al-Anon. My Al-Anon issues, in a lot of rage and exhaustion and hopelessness. I'm half Swedish and half Irish, and neither group is known for optimism. And so it's easy for me to be a little bleak. And what I have found very helpful about the second step is that it talks about hope, coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, to have some kind of life again. It's hope. something can change. Something can improve. Something can adjust. And suddenly there's room to breathe. I can breathe. I heard this at a meeting. Loving someone does not change them. Changes us. And loving someone, you find out it's not about control. But we change in that relationship, and loving someone does not protect them from anything. Powerlessness, unmanageability. I think if you're a parent or a grandparent of an alcoholic or addict, and if your partner is an alcoholic or addict, or your best friend or your favorite brother or sister, you kind of know what God feels like. Loving someone and not being able to fix them. I remember, maybe I'm in college, high school, a Broadway play came out called The Man of La Mancha. And they had some lovely music, and people sang to a lot of it. But one of them that was very, very popular was To Dream the Impossible Dream. To fight the unbeatable fight, to bear with unbearable sorrow, ba-dum, ba-da-ba-da-bum. No hope, no way out, let's keep going. And that's a pre-Al-Anon song. I just want you to know that. That's a pre-Al-Anon song. Because we think that's how it's supposed to be. To go where the brave dare not go. To go where the dumb dare not go, you know. So anyway, at this meeting I mentioned Al-Anon has been very helpful to me. Not right away, it takes time, it's a subtle program. But this lady came up to me afterwards and she said she was 7 years in the other program's recovery and she hates everybody. And should she join Al-Anon? And I said to her, hold out as long as you can. Because if you get here too soon, you'll notice the differences. I mean, some odd folks show up at Al-Anon. One of the oddest experiences, and this is the Baltimore convention. I have a couple of friends back there. And it's 3 guys who are very active in the program. And they are 3 men. All of them were Marines. There are no former Marines. They're all Marines in recovery, and 2 of them knit during meetings. Now, it's different to sit next to knitting Marines at an Al-Anon meeting, but it happens. So here's a few things I know coming into the rooms. I guess I was in my late 30s. I'm now in my 73rd year. I was in my late 30s and exhausted, and I wanted to go back to therapy because family stuff was up, and we have alcoholism in the family, and it's avoided and talked around, and my generation, we could talk about this better, but the generation before, you couldn't say the words. On the Irish Catholic Democratic side of the family, we didn't have alcoholics, we had characters. And they would say things like, Sean is sure a character. And what I didn't know, and maybe your family is different, but sometimes alcoholic families speak in code. You know? Because you can't talk about it directly. So you use euphemism. You use sleight of hand. You use denial. You use all sorts of things, avoidance, so you don't mention the problem is she's drunk again. You don't want to say that because it's so rude. So you say character. What that meant practically was do not let him drive. But again, that's rude. And we're very polite, my family. If we didn't like you, we'd get you extra cups of coffee hoping you'd choke on it. You know, but the gesture's generous, you know. On the Swedish Lutheran Republican side of the family, we didn't have alcoholics either. We had nervous people. We're Andersons, Olsons, and Paulsons, and some got so nervous they'd get locked up. One of them would get telephonitis. You know, you get drunk and you start calling everybody. And my mother was a very worried, polite lady. And this particular cousin would call her and go off on these alcoholic fantasies, most of which are unpleasant. And my mom wouldn't hang up. And she would say, I don't think you're feeling very well. So this went on for years, and every so often, every 2 or 3 or 5 years, my mom and I could have a vulnerable conversation. Usually it wasn't possible, but I treasured the ones that we did have. And this came up. She didn't know what to do. I guess this relative called recently, and my mom was still upset by it, and she would say, well, so-and-so calls, and she just goes off on these awful stories. Well, inquiring minds want to know. And I said, what kind of awful stories? And she said, your oldest brother's a drunk. Well, he is a drunk, Mom, and we all know that. That's common knowledge. My middle brother married into a Mormon family. And my alcoholic cousin would say, everyone knows Mormons are sex crazed, and they go to those sex parties all over the Santa Clara Valley. Not my brother, not his wife. I know that this is not one of their I just found that. And then she had a couple of lurid things about me. It was just, I said, I admire her imagination, but it's just not true. Tom has a string of women up and down the state of California. Everyone knows that. And she thinks I had much more energy than I would have for, So, the next time she calls, I said, tell her you're drunk and hang up. I couldn't do that. It would be so rude. She doesn't even know she's calling you. You know? You're drunk. Hang up. So if you're not feeling well, it covered a lot of damage in my family. One of the things I have found helpful about recovery, it takes a while. Al-Anon's a subtle program. You learn how to talk directly about real things without all the avoidance. I mean, you put the spotlight on it. And then you learn to talk about it without blaming anybody and without letting yourself off the hook. You learn to tell the truth without varnish or editorial opinion. I think that's the first 10 years of Al-Anon. For me, it has been. So I go to a meeting in Berkeley, and this would have been in probably 1982 or 3 or 4 or 5. And the meeting was focused on slogans. And the first slogan I saw that made me pause was the slogan that said, act, don't react. Act, don't react. And one of the things I did as a teacher is I got very involved with kids, and I reacted to them all the time, like a bouncing ball, which explains some of the exhaustion. The Disney people have the Mickey Mouse Club, I guess, which I watched and subscribed to their magazine. And they wanted to show people what a chain reaction was. And so they had a room full of mouse traps, and on each mouse trap which was set, they put 2 ping pong balls. We're going to show you what a chain reaction is. They may have been talking about nuclear stuff, I don't remember, but how one thing leads to another and then it explodes, and it's geometric. It's not 2 and 2 and 2, it's 2 and 4 and 37 and then 12,000. Arguments happen like that. Wars start like that. Anyway, you have this room full of ping pong balls and set mouse traps, and you take one ping pong ball and you throw it into the room. And a zillion things are happening, and I considered that kind of intensive emotional involvement to be necessary for my job. And I did not know how to take time off. I loved it when people called me in crisis. I felt important. Emergency room, let's go. I remember loving the adrenaline of it. And I found that to be highly addictive. Act, don't react. All those ping pong balls in the room are reacting. And I don't want to be doing that. I want to be able to say yes or no without being triggered. This takes time and space and practice. Act, don't react. Another thing I heard in Al-Anon, and I was just shocked by this. A lot of things are none of my business. Everything was my business. And there's a world of gossip and innuendo and spreading tales that I loved and I could get very involved in. And I have been upset, angry about decisions made by people I hadn't seen in 20 years. But I loved the upset. I loved the stuff. This is a crazy way to live. The Serenity Prayer I find a useful tool. I say it regularly. And in there we talk about things we cannot change and things we can change. I need to know that. I need the practicalities because I'll stay alive because of practicality, doing things better or doing things not at all. There are 3 things I cannot change, and I want to know this. As an older person, I get tired more quickly. I bounce back much more slowly. And I'm the energized person, full speed ahead. Take no prisoner, shoot the wounded, let's go. I mean, I've done a lot of that. And to feel tired or worn out for me has been a feeling of shame. I should be doing more. That's one of my first 3 thoughts every morning. That's an old thought. Do more. Go faster. And it's a killer. So the things I cannot change. So I don't waste energy or time or effort. Here are 3 things I cannot change. I cannot change the past. I cannot change the truth. And I cannot change you. I've talked to some drinkers, and I've been a drinker like this. I had favorite things to fight about. Let's go back to college. Do you remember when? Or certain issues, let's keep fighting about that one, you know? I was in the Midwest, Midwest South, maybe Missouri, on a weekend with a bunch of people, and I gave some talks. And as I talk about recovery and stuff, I mention some history stuff, and I mentioned when Prohibition passed in 1920, so it becomes law of the land, it was the first huge expanse of federal power. All of a sudden, the police force of the United States, FBI and Treasury, are involved in enforcing a law concerning alcohol and drugs from sea to shining sea. It's a huge expanse of federal power. So I mentioned that. Some people think it's Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, but Prohibition's a good start. So we're having lunch, and one of the guys across the table from me said, "I heard what you said about Prohibition." He said, "I disagree." Well, people do. He said, "The first real expanse of federal power was the Emancipation Proclamation." And I suddenly saw that we are on the edge of refighting the Civil War. And I turned to the person next to me and said, "Aren't these peas delicious?" Now that's Al-Anon. You don't have to take the bait. I don't have to react. Don't take the bait. It's sometimes rephrased, don't pick up the grenade, you know? Because they're out there. And in a lot of family discussions, that's very, very true in terms of religious stuff or political stuff. I mean, I don't have to play that game anymore, and I did not know that. I thought I had to play that game because that's what it was all about, and I don't have to do that. So since coming into Al-Anon, I have a number of outside issues that I have no opinion on. And that's what I tell people. I have no opinion. You know, again, women in the vote. That's controversial, but stay away from that. Act, don't react. Live and let live. Which means people get to make decisions and have experiences and make mistakes. So do I. Live and let live. Tolerance, toleration. I'm not in charge of you. What a relief. I was going through my favorite piece of Al-Anon literature, which is How Al-Anon Works for Families and Friends. It's the first piece of Al-Anon literature I really loved. I mean, they come up with new stuff, and some of it's helpful, but this I really loved. And I stumbled across the general warranties. I mean, we have the steps and we have the traditions. And then the concepts. I mean, it gets more and more remote, you know. And then you have the warranties, which I think should be tattooed on most of us. And it talks about how we as a communion, as a community of women and men in recovery are going to get along together. And there's only 5 warranties, and they're approved in 1970. And in 1984, the warranties were accorded the same status as the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, officially. After a long conversation, Al-Anon does that. Long conversation. Number 1, that only sufficient operating funds, including an ample reserve, be its prudent financial principle. Sufficient operating funds, enough to pay your bills, plus a reserve. extra money to cover the expenses of a month or 2 or 3. That's where we want to live. Money makes people crazy. Lots of church folks go crazy over money. And lots of political folks go crazy over money. We don't want to follow them in the craziness. 2, that no conference member shall be placed in unqualified authority over other members. So we do not have czars or czarinas or dear leaders in Al-Anon, although some meetings have not heard this yet. I have been to a couple of them where 1 or 2 people ran everything and you had to run it by them and they would get approved or not approved. And one of the first Al-Anon meetings I ever went to in Los Angeles was run on the principle that she's in charge. And they would start the meeting and read a million things like we do. And then people would present this person with their problems. And she would solve them. Lots of common sense, lots of street smarts. But that's not Al-Anon, that's North Korea. And you don't want to get them confused, you know? So even, and I learned this from Blanche in terms of sponsoring people. In Al-Anon, I talk out of my experience. And if I don't have the experience, I refer you to someone who does have the experience. And what they're doing with you is they're sharing their experience. They're not telling you what to do, because I don't know. No conference member shall be placed in unqualified authority over other members. 3, that all decisions be reached by discussion, vote, and whenever possible, by unanimity. Now, sometimes unanimity isn't possible, but there's going to be discussion and vote. And what we don't want to do is have a tyranny of the majority, where 51% terrorizes the 49%. We don't want that. And in some of the literature, it says the opinions of minority opinions should be respected. But don't flex muscle, you know? Discussion, vote, time. There was years of discussion and voting on whether there should be a pamphlet for men. Men in Al-Anon. Well, that'll just make them feel different. Trust me, they're different. You know, especially my knitting Marine friends in Maryland. And they need to know they're welcome. And then a pamphlet for gay and lesbian people. Heads explode. It's really useful to let people feel welcomed. We're so glad you're here. 4, that no conference action ever be personally punitive. We're going to get you. Or an incitement to public controversy. We don't go to the press. And I don't know if this is true. We should not go to the tweet. You know? I just left a meeting and let me tell you. Don't do that. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. And 5, that though the conference serves Al-Anon, it will never perform any acts of government, and that like the fellowship of Al-Anon family groups which it serves, it shall always remain democratic, small d, in thought and action. It gives Al-Anon a very distinctive feel of inclusion and participation and equality. You know, the only requirement for membership is you need to know an alcoholic. Sandy Beach in the other program said, anyone can join AA. You got to know someone to get into Al-Anon. And the fifth tradition. Each Al-Anon family group has but one purpose: to help families of alcoholics. We do this by practicing the 12 steps of AA ourselves, by encouraging and understanding our alcoholic relatives, and by welcoming and giving comfort to families of alcoholics. Encouraging, understanding, welcoming, giving comfort, because there's a war out there. And a lot of people, when they come to Al-Anon, if I may use a World War I reference, they've gotten out of the trenches and they're looking for no man's land. And if they can cross that and get to a safe place, they can have a life. But these are refugees from the war. Exhausted, angry, suspicious, cynical. What do you want? Everyone tells me I should be an Al-Anon. So I've thought about it for 10 years. Prove to me that I should be here. And what we can present is our own stories and the changes that a program of recovery has for us. My sponsor, who was also the adult child of an alcoholic, he was leading a group somewhere, and this old guy came up to him and said, "Are you from such and such a family from Grass Valley?" And my sponsor said, "Yeah, we're from there." He said, "I knew your grandfather. He was the oldest of 6 boys. He was the only one that didn't die of alcoholism." And my sponsor's grandfather had one son who died of alcoholism when my sponsor was 5 years old. So to use the image of a peaceful place in the midst of war, a lot of times it's really not an exaggeration. We have a crucial contribution to make to the human family, and it starts with our own recoveries. What brings you here? Why are you here? What do you find helpful? What slogans do you find helpful? How can you do this a day at a time? What do you do with worry? What do you do with resentment? What do you do with rage? What do you do with anger? Or grief? All those hot topics. I was at a meeting in Southern California, and I mentioned that I get angry, and I do. I think it's a sign of life myself, but anyway, I mentioned I get angry, and this person told me that if I was really spiritual, I'd never get angry. And each year of recovery gives you one more second of response time. That's the biggest difference between 10 years and 20 years. It's 10 seconds. Huge difference. So I waited my required number of seconds and said to her, "That's very helpful." Which is what sarcasm looks like, you know, if you are looking for sarcasm as a tool of recovery. I don't even always know I'm angry, but I get worn out and I get obsessive and I get tired and I start having angry fantasies. And I don't know what to do with those sometimes. And I find if I talk about them with a couple trusted people, they dissipate and I don't have to do anything about this. Whew, but I get angry. A lot of times I get angry if something has scared me. There's a lot of stuff to be afraid about. And I don't want to be reacting to a lot of anger and fear. A few years ago, I was asked to come over to San Francisco County Jail, the men's jail, and speak at an Al-Anon meeting in the men's jail in the San Francisco County Jail. And my first response was, what a stupid thing. Why would these people have Al-Anon? N-A, A-A, yes, yes, yes. But Al-Anon? Al-Anon's for nice people, you know? But I went and I got in, and it was in the pod. Prisons are a chaotic situation, and something should be done. But this was for the men who were in some kind of recovery. They're active in AA. They're active in NA. And they're also all adult children of alcoholics. Well, of course they are. And when Al-Anon came in and these men started showing up to work on that, they started changing. The warden asked for 2 more meetings a week. He said, this is changing people's lives. Learning how to mind your own business. Learning how to keep your mouth shut. Learning how to focus on your recovery. Learning how to take care of your own acre, and you don't have to take care of other people's stuff. So I've become a convert to Al-Anon meetings in prisons and jails. There are lots of ways people talk about alcoholism and addiction. Allergy of the body and obsession of the mind. Dr. Thibault, I think Harry Thibault, 1940s and 50s into the 60s, he worked a lot with alcoholics. He was a psychiatrist who was very close to the Alcoholics Anonymous Fellowship, and he describes a lot of the alcoholic craziness. And he says a lot of it is just that when your addiction kicks in, your spiritual and emotional growth stops. And what you have to get alcoholics and addicts to do is grow up, because they act like kids, even though they're 35 years old. And the program, the steps are to help people grow up. And I think that's true for us too. Getting involved in being alive rather than standing off to the sidelines or living in self-constructed prisons, which some of us do. We build the walls because we need some kind of safety. And so we build a wall and we're safe and it protects us. And that might be, you're really good at athletics, so that's what you do. Or you're really good at school, or you do this really well. And so we develop some of these things, and that's all we focus on. And I remember I found books to be safe. And I would always have a book, I still do. And my older brothers were yelling about how I was getting away with murder. And my mother said, he's reading a book no one else in this family reads, leave him alone. And that helped me develop reading skills and a fair amount of isolation, may I also say. So what we have to do, we discover our fortress has become a prison, and we have to take down the walls little bit by little bit by little bit. And that can take a long time. Back to that Baltimore meeting, there was several members shared at Baltimore about Al-Anon history, and there was a woman there who joined Al-Anon in 1955. And she said when she first started going to meetings, they were told, your whole purpose is to support the alcoholics. She said, we were cookie makers and coffee makers until we discovered our own deep craziness and that we really need a program of recovery because in Al-Anon, we do not have to drink to kill. You know? Nervous laughter, nervous laughter, nervous laughter. Yeah. But you know what I mean. In Baltimore, there was nervous laughter and a couple of very old ladies applauding, just. I need a program that helps me rebuild my relationships with other people in ways that are also helpful to myself. It's a life-saving program. We get a daily reprieve from the worst of our crazy. I get a daily reprieve from the worst of my crazy. I have some self-destructive thinking and some self-destructive behavior that can happen if I'm caught by surprise, if I get too hungry, or I get too angry, or I get too lonely, or I get too tired. What I've been doing in the last few years is consciously doing less busy all the time. I'm letting myself have free days or downtime or away time, and it's changing my perspective a lot. I'm glad for that. I have been very much involved in, if I'm busy enough, everything will be okay. And then why am I tired all the time? Well. So the story is told, and this is as we're wrapping up. Alcoholism is a lot like dancing with a gorilla. You're not done dancing until the gorilla is done dancing. See? And I can say, as someone who has behaved inappropriately ever so many times, some gorillas are pretty cute. And you can have a lot of fun with the right gorilla. The downside is you're dead, but until then, this is just wonderful. When I first heard the story, they did not say dancing with the gorilla, they said dating the gorilla. And they did not say dating, so you get an idea of what's going on. And some of us like the danger and some of us like the excitement and all. It's just all true. So the story, if you're clean and sober today, it means the gorilla let go. It doesn't mean you've outsmarted it. It doesn't mean you're better than or faster than. It's just taking a little break. And if the gorilla has let go, get out of the cage. And don't go back into the cage, even when the gorilla starts humming your song, which it does. Oh, I'll never do that again. No. I'm done. I took an oath that I will never do that again, and I let everyone know, and I'll never do that again. And then the moon's full. You've got a little itch. You'd like a bit of excitement, maybe a couple of laughs. Let's try this one more time. I have a friend in Vegas who says, I don't want to dance with the gorilla, but every so often I want to pet it just a little bit. So. Watch that. Now, we who love alcoholics and addicts, and they're cute and they're fun, you know. We who love alcoholics and addicts, we visit the zoo a lot. And you walk through and you see lions and tigers and bears. I was in Tokyo last October, and I went to the Tokyo Zoo, and I had a wonderful experience looking at all these things, and they had tigers there, and they had monkeys. It was really wonderful. I had a good time. I like zoos, and they had giraffes. I like the giraffes. So we visit the zoo a lot, and we get entertained, and then we walk by the gorilla cage. And we see the person we love dancing with the gorilla. And we go crazy. Might be your spouse. Might be your brother or sister, you know, again. Might be your mom or dad. Or your favorite auntie. Might be one of your kids or grandkids. And we go crazy. Something must be done. So we crawl into the cage and we start vacuuming and sweeping, you know, moving things around to get the right feng shui, you know, that'll help. Hanging nice pictures, Chinese poetry, none of that helps. Vegan meals, that doesn't help. So then we get between the gorilla and the person we love, and we try to pull them apart, and the gorilla turns on us and yanks our arms and legs off. And the casualty rates for those of us who love alcoholics and addicts are very, very high in terms of emotional casualty, physical casualty, spiritual casualty. So we have a program too, and it's called Al-Anon. And a lot of the Al-Anon program comes down to stay out of the cage. Let's say that together. Stay out of the cage. But I only want to sweep and vacuum a little bit. It's not your cage. It's not your business. We're going to meet over by the giraffes. And we will talk about our need to take care of other people's wreckage. And trust me, we have more than enough of our own. Pay attention to your own stuff. In Al-Anon also, it's the control stuff. We're going to force the election. We're going to force the outcome. We're going to control this thing. We're going to get it right. It's Charlie Brown and Lucy. And Lucy says to Charlie Brown, how many times does 5 go into 3? And Charlie Brown says 5 doesn't go into 3. And Lucy says it does if you push. So you want to watch that. Last point, I think the fresh air in Al-Anon helps clear the heart and clear the head. And my sponsor thinks that the welcome we receive at our first Al-Anon meetings are the first experience many of us have of a higher power, a power greater than ourselves welcoming us into the rooms. And Al-Anon is not for people who need it, it's for people who want it. And to want it, you need to have that gift of desperation. So sometimes when a crisis happens to us or someone we love, it sure looks like bad news, but a lot of new life can come out of that. And I think God, as I understand God, welcomes refugees and desperados and desperate people all the time. If you're new to Al-Anon, welcome. It's a good community to stay in. Think about Albuquerque. You will meet the fellowship, and it is a great gift to receive their gift. I think that's everything I know. Thanks for coming tonight. So there.